Matt happens to be a superstar in the AI world, and I'm going to have him tell a little bit about himself, and then we're just going to have a chat about the amazing things that Matt's pulling off in the wonderful state of Utah. That's probably going to influence the other states as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Matt Winters. I am the AI education specialist here at the Utah State Board of Education. This role's been enacted since about this time last year. Before my educational journey started as a college writing teacher, I moved into K-12, as my friend Jessica Pack puts it, to the land of bad decisions in junior high. And then I taught that for a few years. Right before COVID, became a school-wide technology coach and district coach, and moved on to statewide ed and then into this role. And so right now I support our districts and charter schools across the entire state with AI policy, with understanding how to bring AI into the classroom, but then also helping with professional development and outreach to organizations like this and across the country.
Yes, and you forgot to tell him the big award that you just got.
Thank you for reminding me. Yes, we just received the ASU GSV Education Innovation Award for impact for our work that we're doing here in the state of Utah around artificial intelligence.
That is incredible. And you have kind of set the bar too, because you're the only person in the only job that we know of in the country that does what you do. So
currently, as far as we know, I'm the only one who has this role and has this kind of breakdown of, there's a lot of people who are working in AI and they're all fantastic. And I love talking to my other SEAs across the country and learning what they're doing, because we're all doing unique, purposeful work around AI. But in terms of solo, like this is all I do is AI. I don't have other responsibilities at the agency. And so every day it's focusing on how we can do this the best for our students, how we can interact with our teachers, and then again, sharing it out with the larger community, both in Utah and outside of Utah.
and how do you work with districts? How do you work mostly with the district level and kind of helping them understand? Give us an idea of what this role really can mean, especially for other states that are thinking about doing the same thing.
Absolutely. The role is roughly broken into thirds, as it was kind of enacted from day one. The first third is mostly around policy and how we engage with policy discussions, both at the LEA level in our districts and charter schools, all the way up through working with legislators, lawmakers. We have a unique situation here in the state of Utah where we also have the first of its kind Office of AI Policy under our Department of Commerce. And so I get to work with them quite a bit, which is great. Then the second part is working with stakeholder groups. So going out and working with our districts and charter schools, whether it be the state superintendents, who I just spent a little bit of time with, about half an hour, about a week and a half ago, to working with our teachers, doing professional development and doing outreach, or working with coaches and kind of the district level or like kind of the administrative level work of it. So like tomorrow, I'm going to one of our local USB conferences that's for administrators and doing a presentation specifically targeting AI for administrators and how to engage their teachers in the process. It's going to be really exciting, but I get to see all layers of the educational kind of spectra here in Utah and help to engage those processes. The best part is talking to students though, learning how they're viewing AI, how they're working with it.
Do you give them kind of a glimpse into their own futures of like where AI could potentially take some of their employment opportunities down the road?
Kind of. What I mostly focus on with the students when I get a chance to sit down with them is I mostly want to listen to them. I hear a lot of what's happening in our schools here in Utah from teachers, from our administrators, and then I hear a lot nationally. So I'm very tapped into the community and I can really, and I'm a former teacher, so I understand that role, but I don't know what it's like to be a 17-year-old or a 15-year-old in school right now with artificial intelligence. And so a lot of times where I get these opportunities to go out and work with student groups, I actually usually drop what I'm doing and sit and have a conversation with them and ask them questions around what they're seeing in their own community, what they're doing with AI, what they would like to see with it. And then, yeah, I talk a little bit about like being prepared with this is a really good idea. It's that adage that comes out of Stanford of people who use AI are going to be replacing people who don't. And I think that's a really astute observation. And our students are starting to pick up on that and see it at all levels. What they're not seeing, and I think this is a really interesting point for educators at large, is that a lot of them don't understand when they're cheating with AI. They think they are, they may or may not know that they're actually doing that. And so educators need to have this thought process around and kind of shift their thought process to giving more clear guidelines on AI usage, both at kind of the global classroom level or even the global like LEA level, but also on the individual assignments. What's appropriate here versus another assignment to enact in it, whether it be a writing project or research object, or even just like a simple like problem set for like mathematics. We want to make sure that students know where the lines are so that they can actually achieve what we're trying to set out for them to achieve.
I've used some AI for mathematics with my family members who might be in classes needing a little help. And they'll call me like I have, I'm sure you get called too because you're a teacher, former teacher. So they think you have all the answers to all the answer books. And you're like, that wasn't really my background. But you don't want to let them down. So now magically I can, ask AI and get an answer. And what I love about it, especially with math, is it talks you through solving the problem. So I think that's really not a bad thing to me as a former physics teacher. If I don't explain it properly and my kids can, use AI to get a more in-depth explanation of how to solve the problem, I would be okay with that. I wouldn't want them to use it to solve the problem. I would want them to use it as a guide to solve the problem. So I may give some practice problems that they can use AI with to kind of hone their craft of solving that problem. And then now, absent AI, let's see if you got it, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're starting to see a shift on, I was anticipating this about 6 to 8 months ago when I moved in the role, mostly because you're going to hear a term here in a second that's everyone knows, but it's something that's very near and to my heart, which is creativity. We're seeing a shift away from AI tools for teachers that are doing things for them to tools that enact them as a creative profession, the creative professionals they are. Big fan of Ken Robinson and have been for a really long time. And one of the things that he says is that teaching is inherently a creative profession. And AI, when properly applied to the learning environment, is a creative tool. It has so many ways that it can be used and integrated into the classroom in really innovative ways. But if teachers only see it as a tool to help them speed up processes that they do on every day, like emails and things like that, then they never make the leap to that process. And it's the same for our students. If they only see it as a tool to help them finish an assignment quickly, they never see the creative possibilities of it. And what's funny is that they're surrounded by that on every single part of their day. They see creative applications of AI from the gaming situations that they find themselves in, to shopping, to driving around their city, to being in the classroom environment. And so we want to make sure that AI doesn't get stuck in this productivity space, but it actually moves into creativity, and it helps people to unlock the process in which we can work and be more interested and engaged workers. One of my favorite stories is a local here in Utah. One of the people I work with on the AI work, he told me that he pays for a version of AI for himself, personal use. And on a long drive to a very far away site here in Utah, because it's a geographically large state, he sat and talked to the AI for about trying to understand a complex physics idea that he never quite understood. And by the end of the drive, he's like, I now understand that. And it's so helpful because he just consistently asked questions and kind of came back and said, I don't understand that. Can you rephrase it? And I think that's the power of AI, is that creativity and that curiosity that kind of plays into it.
In developing that deeper understanding, like on those math problems, I may know superficially how to solve it, but I don't know with the complexity. And to be able to dive down with AI as your partner and think through each step and why you're having to solve it in that order, in that way, is, I think, the magic of AI. I think, we have a lot of teachers that have expressed incredible concern when it comes to creative writing in AI. So tell me, when you think about writing or those creative outlets that we see, art, I mean, all of these things, music production, we hear a lot about copyright infringement and cheating. And, that seems to be in those creative lanes that we seem to hear more about the challenges and the quote problems with it. So how are you, with your love of creativity and AI, how are you tackling that as you're working with districts?
Yeah, such a good question. And I do have to like caveat everything with saying that there's one of the things that we say here at USB and that I've heard said in the community is that like, we always want to have a human in the system, human in, human out, that sort of thing, in whatever we're doing with AI. And it's so important that we're able to keep the humanness in that system. And I think that's where we start to see breakdowns when, especially we talk about creative professions. The US Copyright Office has come out and said, you can't just copyright something that's completely AI generated. It has to have some sort of human part to it, human process in it, manipulation, movement of some kind. And I think that's so important to highlight is that you can still be creative with AI, and especially in the classroom when we put it that way. But also, there's lots of examples out in the world where genuine creatives have used AI to do things that would never have been able to be done previously. Like one of my favorite examples is Brian Eno, who was the producer for Joshua Tree by U2 and David Bowie and like so many other music producers. And before generative AI was even hot in 2022 and 2017, he put out a whole album on an application that would shift with the day through AI in terms of music. It's beautiful. Or you look at somebody like Drift, who uses AI and drones to create new pieces of art. Amy Kurzweil, who's a cartoonist, her dad's the famous AI theorist Ray Kurzweil, who wrote a whole book about her work trying to create basically a RAG database chatbot that focuses all of the letters and writings of her grandfather so that she could, in quotes, talk to her grandfather. I mean, these are creative processes that would not have been able to be enacted if they weren't by AI. And so, is there a space with creativity, especially in creative arts, writing, dance, music, all of these different spaces for AI to be there? Absolutely. But we have to think of it as a partner in the process, not something that takes over. But also, we have to remember that there are times where using AI actually would not necessarily be useful in the creative process. And it's okay to shut it down and go write for yourself or go draw or create in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's important to pass on to our students is that not everything in the creative process has to be completely technologically mediated.
I think that is going to be where we're going to see things shift in teaching, is thinking more along the lines of how can we use these adaptive technologies, these adaptive software, these AI generated solutions in the classroom in such a way that it empowers the learner and allows the learner to develop agency through the use of those tools, or maybe sharpen the saw on their agency through the use of those tools. Teachers that entered 20 years ago are going to be less likely to adopt that kind of a teaching modality of just like, we're going to walk alongside the technology and let the students use the technology as they see fit and empower them with it. And then we might have to pull them back from it and kind of correct, but we want them to self-correct before we have to interject. That's how I see it. What do you think? How is teaching going to change?
That's a great question. And I think with the rapidity and the shifts that we're seeing with generative AI, anybody who says this is what it's going to look like in 3 to 5 years is, in essence, selling you a line there. But I think you're onto something where we have to think about AI as a collaborative partner in the process. And I do want to say that I don't think it necessarily has to do with the age of the teacher. I think it actually has to do with how the teacher was prepared. I know plenty of teachers who are older than I am who are either just as creative as I am or way more creative. And I know teachers who are younger than me who were taught more traditional methods of education. And I think it has to do with being able to see the possibilities of what you can do in the classroom and being able to enact those possibilities with students. One of the things I think is really important to note in this is that we as humans always go to doomsday scenarios with new technologies. I came out of one of the things I did for a long time was radio DJing, and I loved being on the radio, and that's how I learned how to podcast and do all sorts of things. In the history of radio, you go back to the 1970s, and there were articles about it's doomsday for radio and for recording artists because there's this new thing called cassettes, and it's going to destroy the recording industry. And then CDs came along, and they said the same. And then sharing services came along, and streaming services, and every single time it's been this doomsday scenario. And so instead of jumping immediately to how this may destroy a way of working, we need to think instead of how it will shift what the role and responsibilities of the people in the system are. And I think that's a really important thought process for us as educators, is looking at technology, especially AI, and going, how does this push me in a different direction in my classroom? Because in that one, I'll share this one story. When I was in the classroom, I did a lot of choice-based projects. I learned as a college instructor that students respond much better when they have a vested interest in what they're studying, especially in a writing classroom. And so I had a lot of my students in 8th grade, 9th grade choose projects towards the end of the year of like, I want to study this. And then I'd help them with the writing structure, but I also had to help them with the content. And one day, this wonderful student who never was into writing at all, but one of my favorite students, he was just one of those kids that you want to high five every time he comes in the classroom. He came to me and he said, I want to write my essay about how to make the best engine for my motorcycle. And I looked at him and was like, awesome, because he was on fire, like run, let him do that. And in my head, I was like, I have no idea how to help him work through that content. And so that's where AI could step in. I mean, if I were able to constitutionalize a bot to focus on him researching and understanding how to make engines better, that takes that content knowledge off of me, but opens up the personal realm. And I can focus on what's really important, which is the writing process. And I think that's really that, again, going back to this whole thing of, it's not about, it's going to push us away from what makes education great. It's going to push us in different directions of all the things that make education great and helping us to recenter what the classroom is all about.
Yeah. Oh man. Recenter what the classroom's all about. That's gonna be the tagline of this podcast. Yes. Well, our time is up. That passed so fast. Our time is is up already. But I want to give you the chance to offer any kind of final insights. Although I do feel like that last line was pretty much, you know, drop mic. Yeah, exactly. But what kind of final thoughts or encouragement, or do you want to send an invitation out to anybody listening that they can follow you on Instagram, or your time, my brother?
Awesome. I appreciate it. There's a couple things I'll say is like, we here at the Utah State Board of Education are very collaborative. Even if you're in a different state than Utah, love to help understand, especially if you're in a large system, what we're doing here and how you can take things from it. Feel free to reach out to me. Our website is schools.utah.gov. I'm easy to find on there if you just search Matt Winters. I'm also on LinkedIn. You'll see my COVID streak in my beard there that has come up, which is what the big streak in the middle is. But no, I would just say we're all in this together. AI, generative AI hit everyone on this whole planet equally at the same time. No matter who you are, if you had some sort of internet connected device and a cell signal or a Wi-Fi signal, you could get onto generative AI day one and start working with it. We are all in this struggle together to understand the implications, not just in education, but how it enacts in workforce and transportation and all over the space. And so if you are struggling with this, find a community around in your local community, in the national community, and the international community that are talking and thinking about the same things you are, so that you can better understand how this is impacting your special circumstances. Especially we as educators, we need to consider that this isn't just affecting teachers, but it's affecting our students, our parents, our administrators, and every facet of education from top to bottom. And so I would just encourage you to find that community out there to help support yourself.
Yes. And as a matter of fact, you've already found it. It's right here in the HMH community. Yes, Teachers Corner. So thank you so much for being here. They can have other communities, but let's start with us. Thank you so much for being here and for being on. And you're going to be at ISTE and you're going to stop by my booth. That's going to in the HMH booth. So K20 Connect will have a booth. HMH has a booth. And then you're going to be on a panel with me. And that is supposed to be the second day of ISTE in the afternoon. And that is as vague as I can make it, really. I don't have the date or the time memorized, but we will put that in the show notes so that everybody can have access to that. And they can find Matt and I will be at ISTE, and you can find us there in those 3 locations. So thank you very much for being here. And thank you very much for listening to our podcast. And I wish everybody a fabulous day.